All right, let's dive into a source that tackles a really tough question. What are the real economic and political effects of ethnic diversity? Now, this is a topic that sparks some pretty strong opinions, right? But our goal here is just to unpack the data and the arguments that are presented in the source material piece by piece.
So, let's start with a real-world puzzle. Our source takes us to a construction site in Chicago. The job site itself was incredibly diverse, but when you looked closer, the individual companies, the contracting firms, were anything but. You had Polish workers sticking with other Poles and Hispanic workers with other Hispanics. They were working next to each other, sure, but not with each other inside the same company. And that observation brings up the central question for our whole analysis. I mean, if diversity is such a clear-cut benefit, why would business owners, who are focused on the bottom line, on making a profit, organize their companies this way? It kind of challenges a common assumption, and it's exactly what we're here to dig into.
Okay, Section 1, the diversity puzzle. To start solving this, we're going to start small. We'll look at the costs and benefits of diversity inside a single company, just like those ones on that construction site.
Well, the source offers a pretty practical explanation. It suggests this isn't necessarily about prejudice, it's more of a simple cost-benefit calculation. Think about it. For that small Polish construction firm, the daily costs of communication barriers or cultural adjustments, well, they might just outweigh the potential, more abstract benefits of adding a new perspective. All right, Section 2, the economic equation. So now, let's zoom out from that one single worksite. What does the bigger body of economic research cited in the source have to say about diversity in the workplace?
The source really frames this as a balancing act, like a scale. On one side, you've got the potential costs, things like friction in communication or maybe lower team spirit. But on the other side, you've got clear benefits, new ideas, more creativity. The overall economic effect really just depends on which side of that scale ends up weighing more.
So, what's the bottom line from all the academic studies? Well, this is where it gets really interesting. The source points out that the research is, frankly, all over the place. One study finds a negative effect. Another finds it hurts simple tasks but has no effect on complex ones. A third one says, hey, it hurts cohesion, but it boosts creativity. The big takeaway here is that there is no simple, universal answer.
And this might help explain why the research is so muddled. The source argues that we need to be way more precise. Diversity isn't just one thing. We actually need to break it down and distinguish between ethnic diversity, birthplace diversity, and value diversity. They're not all the same.
And here is the absolute crucial point from the source. The type of diversity matters a lot. While the research on the economic impact of ethnic diversity is often negative or just plain unclear, the data for value diversity and for skilled immigrant diversity, well, that often shows a clear positive effect on things like innovation. So that really complicates the simple more is always better narrative. Okay, time to shift gears. Section 3, the political reaction. So how do these complex, sometimes messy, dynamics play out in the political world? The stakes here move from a company's performance right to the ballot box itself.
According to the source, a very specific political process started to unfold across a lot of Western nations. For a long time, mainstream political parties tended to, avoid talking about any potential negative sides of immigration. This created what the source calls a political vacuum, and, as it points out, a democracy can't stand a vacuum for long. So, anti-immigration populist parties popped up to fill that space.
The source points to what it calls a remarkably consistent pattern across many different countries, a direct statistical correlation between the inflow of non-Western immigrants or refugees and a rising vote share for right-wing populist parties.
For a really clear example, let's look at a specific study from Denmark that's cited in the source. Researchers were looking at local elections, and they found that for every 1% increase in the local non-Western immigrant population,
The vote for anti-immigration parties went up somewhere between 1.2 and 2.3%. This shows a direct, measurable political reaction to demographic change, right there in the data.
Section 4, a question of cohesion. Now, this political reaction leads us to the final, and maybe the most sensitive part of our analysis, the link between diversity, inequality, and a society's overall social cohesion.
Now, the source makes a really crucial distinction here. It's not saying that diversity alone creates risk. It's more complex. Instead, it argues that social friction tends to go up when you have ethnic diversity combined with significant economic inequality and discrimination between those groups.
And to illustrate this point, the source presents data on ethnic riots in Western Europe from 1990 to 2019. And what the data shows is that countries with large, culturally distinct immigrant communities that also face marginalization, countries like France and Britain, have recorded the highest number of these incidents.
And when you compare whole regions, the contrast is pretty stark. The source calculates that the rate of these riots, per capita, was significantly higher in diverse Western Europe than in the more homogeneous post-communist EU countries. Now, it's super important to note, the source says, the absolute risk for any single individual is extremely low, but it interprets this higher frequency as a potential symptom of lower social cohesion.
So, after going through the economics, the politics, and the data on social cohesion, what's the final takeaway from this source material? What are we supposed to make of all this?
And here it is. The central argument is that these outcomes, they aren't set in stone. The effects of diversity, whether they turn out to be positive or negative, are not inevitable. Instead, they depend hugely on the context, on the specific policies a society decides to enact, and on how well social and economic integration is actually managed.
So this explainer doesn't give us a simple answer, because, well, the source material doesn't either. Instead, it leaves us with a final, really challenging question. How can a society navigate these incredibly complex trade-offs? The path forward, it seems to suggest, isn't about ignoring the costs or ignoring the benefits of diversity, but about trying to design intelligent policies to get that balance right.